The flexible merit standard model focuses on the determinants of situation-specific open-minded cognition. It assumes that open-minded cognition is malleable, that is, that it varies across situations. When we try to examine the determinants of situation-specific open-minded cognition, we consider multiple determinants represented by the many Ds on the left side of this screen. The effect of each of these determinants on situation-specific open-minded cognition is what we call mediated by in psychology and the social sciences, that the causal effect flows through like a causal chain reaction. A middle step, which is that it's mediated by situation-specific social norms that are activated in the mind of the individual. So you have a certain external cue which activates a social norm about what one feels normatively obligated to respond according to, which in turn elicits a personal level of open-minded cognition that the individual adopts. So here's really the same flow diagram, just presented in a slightly different format. The multiple determinants of open-minded cognition are simply the boxes on the left. The middle mediating step in the causality is labeled here situation-specific open-minded normative perception, because strictly speaking, it's the individual's perception of the extent to which they should be open-minded in that situation that we are trying to capture. Which in turn then influences the individual's personal level of open-minded cognition within the specific situation. So you see multiple determinants of open-minded cognition on the left side of this screen, represented by the boxes. In this particular segment of my lecture material, I'm going to focus on what's marked in pink here, the untenable message effect, which documents the effect of a particular characteristic of the situation. So first we had to develop and validate this now new measure of what we're calling situation-specific open-minded cognition, as well as a measure of the situation-specific perception of the social norms, the perceived extent to which individuals think in this situation one should be open-minded. So, and we also wanted to show that open-minded cognition is malleable, that it varies across situations, depending upon what we call message tenability, which will be more clear in just a few moments. And then lastly, to demonstrate that the effect of this situational cue, message tenability, on situation-specific open-minded cognition is in fact mediated by the activated social norm. So, according to our view, or according to what I should say the flexible merit standard model, social norms do not prescribe open-mindedness in all situations. Open-mindedness is perceived as virtuous or socially desirable in some situations. For example, if you're listening to educational experts discuss a new math program. However, open-mindedness is not predicted to, or not necessarily perceived to be virtuous and socially desirable. It's not necessarily perceived to be appropriate or virtuous in other situations. For example, if you're in a situation where you're listening to a group of neo-Nazis who are advocating ethnic cleansing, the virtuous, admirable, and appropriate thing may be to be close-minded and refuse to openly consider their arguments. Imagine if Rosa Parks were asked to openly listen to reasons why she should be required to sit in the back of the bus. We might regard her refusal to openly consider these lines of argumentation to be virtuous, admirable, and therefore socially appropriate. So sometimes social norms prescribe that it's appropriate to be less open-minded. For all of these reasons, in addition to measuring situation-specific open-minded cognition, how open-minded one indicates they would be in the situation, it's important also to measure perceptions of the social norms that are activated in this situation, the extent to which one believes one should be open-minded in the situation. So just to make clear, what we mean by situation-specific open-minded cognition is the extent to which one believes they personally would be open-minded in the situation, whereas what we mean by the normative perception is the extent to which one believes one should be open-minded in the situation. So we went about measuring these new constructs, which are situation-specific. But in fact, this measure is very similar to what you have already seen in the general open-minded cognition measure. For example, to measure open-minded normative perceptions, the first item was simply changed by inserting "in this situation" and "one should" into the item. So the first item becomes, "in this situation, one should be open to considering these viewpoints." And we did the same thing for the remainder of the items. But otherwise, the item content corresponds quite closely to the open-minded cognition measure that you have already seen. We then also created the situation-specific measure of open-minded cognition itself, the extent to which one personally would be open-minded in a particular situation that is presented to the individual. Here, we simply put in the phrase "I would," where you previously saw the phrase "one should" in the prior measure. We again validated these two measures using the same statistical procedure that we used when validating the general open-minded cognition measure. In addition, we wanted to validate that when people say "I would be open-minded," we wanted to make sure that they weren't just, pretending to do so in order to look good or appear socially desirable. So we wanted evidence that they actually do. And what we found in our experiment, the key findings supported this notion, which is that individuals who are high in situation-specific open-minded cognition are also more likely to pay attention to political information that contradicts their pre-existing political opinions. In fact, that correlation was a healthy 0.56 in our experiment. Exactly what do we mean by that? Well, there's two versions of this. For example, if we focus on liberal Democrats in this experiment, liberal Democrats who were high in open-minded cognition were more willing to read statements that had been constructed by conservative Republicans than were liberal Democrats who are low in open-minded cognition. Conversely, if we focus on conservative Republican participants in our experiment, conservative Republicans who are high in open-minded cognition were more willing to read statements provided by liberal Democrats than conservative Republicans that are low in open-minded cognition. So it appears that our measure of situation-specific open-minded cognition is not just people making up stories about how open-minded they would be, but actually taps into how open-minded they really would be, because it's correlated with how open-minded they actually are.